Yes, hello, good afternoon. This is Daniel Fitzgerald. I haven't done a video in quite some time. I'm going to post it on YouTube. I first would like people to know that I've gotten 45 views on my video dated 3 years ago. The title of the video is Daniel and Jennifer Fitzgerald's Nazi Case Against Canada Government and Police. I just checked it out on YouTube, the video. You can type it in and look for yourself if you can find it. And here, my video is right at the top. I've got 45 views on it in 3 years, and right below it, popped up, right below my video is this House of Commons Hunka ordeal, the Nazi, the thing that happened in the House of Commons, right below my video, which got 7 million views, okay? Every video below it, the 4 or 5 videos after that got between 100,000 views and 10,000 views in 10 months. Mine's still at 45 views dated 3 years ago, which explains that the Trudeau government is censoring our video Nazi allegations against Parliament Hill. That's what they've been doing, is censoring our videos. Now, mind you, what I noted is, like my video that I posted 3 years ago, you can go see it if you want under that title, is right underneath it is Wikipedia connected to my video about the Holocaust of the Jewish people. Yeah, and I'm partially Jewish, so I still, even though I don't like the Jewish community here really at all, not that much, here in Ottawa, because they turned on my wife and I, even though we have Nazi evidence against the government, and then you find out it's because there's some Zionist Jewish MPs, Zionist Jewish people, MPs on Parliament Hill, who are in with the governments, okay, and who basically manipulated the Jewish communities here to ignore my wife and I's Nazi evidence against the government of Canada. Now, this is just kind of an update. I'm going to be working with the Russian Federation, or try to get them to work with us. I don't know yet the dynamic of that. But I'm going to try and get them to work with my wife and I to try and find a way to get rid of the Trudeau government and Parliament's censorship of our criminal Nazi allegations against the state. So I don't know how that's gonna pan out. I mean, I don't know yet. I know the Russians have all our evidence that we could get to them, although it's redacted. So we're just going to see how that plays out. Trudeau's Bill C-63 is aimed at me and my wife because of our criminal evidence against the government, for which they have the government of Canada and their opposition parties. They've been censoring every Canadian with any kind of human rights evidence against them, or criminal evidence against them of corruption. That's what they've been doing. And this is like the censorship of my video, 45 views in 3 years, indicates this. Okay, that they're censoring Canadians who are making serious criminal allegations against Canada's Parliament, which comprises of the NDP, the Bloc currently, and the Conservatives and the Liberals. So I already made a video, but I deleted it. It's too long. It's 2 hours and some on. So I just decided no. Canada's a very dangerous country to live in now, but before I get into this, I want to make this video as short as possible. I don't want people to have to listen for... You all won't have access to it anyway, because Trudeau's going to censor it because of our criminal case. But I'd like to indicate that our case is still open at the ICC, and that now I have a lot more evidence against the government of Canada and the opposition due to events that have occurred in the last 4 years since we gave our evidence, our redacted evidence, to the Russian embassy for the Security Council, okay, in New York City, and also the ICC. So a lot has happened since then. Okay, if you watch my video, if you can get to it, okay, which you're going to have a hard time doing that because the government is heavily censoring it, so it's very hard for you to find it. But if you can, you'll note that it's 3 years old. And I explained in the video, the Nazi policies against my wife and I, the attacks of our two boats, Jacob's Goshen and Jacob's Ladder, by the government and their Nazi recruits, which is clearly anti-Semitic against a boat named after Jacob, who is a Jew. These were anti-Semitic attacks by the conservative Harper government and their Quebec Nazi cronies in security, essentially. This is why I won't budge on not supporting the Conservative Party of Canada nor the Liberals. I won't budge on that because I keep trying to tell Canadians that they're in together. We're talking, let me just go back a little now. I want to try and get this thing in alphabetical order, this video. I'm not very good at that, so I may drift off into changing the subject and so on. So just bear with me on this, please. I want people to know of my projections, okay? And for those that can access my videos, that I had been in contact with the Russian Federation now for over 10 years, okay? And primarily their UN mission in New York, two different ambassadors, the current one and the one before is when I first got started, which is over 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I called them back then, 7, 8 years ago now, the Russian Federation mission in New York. They didn't know who I was, but they answered the phone. And I told them that Canada's government are Nazis. I told them that then. I told them about the attacks against our boats, Jewish boats named after Jacob. I made it very clear to them back then. And then since then, over the years, I was in contact with Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles until I found out that they're run by the Zionists, okay? The problem is, what I'm getting at here is that in regards to the Zionists, is that what I found out is that the Zionist Jewish people, and I'm related to them, by blood, is they got themselves in so deep politically with the UK government, Canada's government, the US government, like, for example, Mr. Schumacher in the House of Representatives in Washington, the German government, the French government. The Zionist Jews got themselves politically in so deep with these governments and their crimes that my wife and I couldn't get anywhere with the Jewish community at all on our Nazi case, okay? And that's a hard lesson to be learned, and that's why the Jewish community, the Jewish community here in Ottawa, they're simply listening to their Jewish Zionist politicians on Parliament Hill, and they've axed my wife and I's Nazi case. You see what I'm saying here? So that's why the Jewish community here is not responding the right way. That's what I'm trying to say at this stage. And I got mad with Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles, very angry because they were not acting appropriate based on the many recordings I left for Rabbi Marvin Heyer, starting about 4 or 5 years ago. And then they cut me off and didn't want me calling there anymore and blocked my number because I literally assaulted them verbally for being traitors. We're talking about, an international organization based on Simon Wiesenthal. And, they were confronted with a real Nazi case regarding a very Nazified government on Parliament Hill in their opposition here. Simon Wiesenthal Center was confronted with that material by me verbally. I had no other way to get it to them. I tried to send them documents about our case against the government of Canada. They never received them. I took photographs with my iPhone Pro 12. I sent the documents by photograph to the center. The receptionist there indicated to me they never received them. Okay, this is Canada. This is the Canadian government censoring. The Canadian government has proven to my wife and I that they will censor any evidence against them that's very serious, that could get them into a lot of trouble with the international community. Okay, now that was then. Now things have changed drastically. We have the Nazi attacks against the freedom protesters here in Ottawa, which correspond with certain allegations, in our case, against the Canadian federal government and their opposition. We have what's gone on in the Ukraine as well, and President Vladimir Putin's a very truthful statement about NATO countries who are supporting the Nazi regime in the Ukraine and the Nazi Azov battalion with arms. Very true. There's no lie there, okay? So essentially, things have changed. And we have more ammunition now against the Canadian government regarding these things. Common sense dictates that if you have a Russian leader and the Russians hate Nazis, they can spot a Nazi blindfolded, okay? And when it comes from a superpower leader like President Vladimir Putin, essentially this means that Vladimir Putin is in agreement with my wife and I and our Nazi allegations against the state of Canada, okay? You know, I'm sure that Simon Wiesenthal Center, to some degree, must be kicking himself in the teeth in Beverly Hills, because I told Rabbi Marvin Heyer in messages, I told him, I said, look, Canada's Nazifying. The government are Nazis on Parliament Hill. They applied the Nuremberg laws against my wife and I. They applied Hitler's restrictions against my wife and I, because Nazis in their security and their recruits kept committing Nazi crimes against my wife and I and our property. And so the government opted to protect them, to give them cover. They didn't bother to bring out legislation based on our case to protect the Canadian people, bring out legislation to protect the Canadian people from Nazi war criminals in security and their street recruits. They didn't bother to do that. Instead, they opted to protect the criminals in security, is what they did, you see. I pointed this out to Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles many times, and many phone calls. Then, you know, this was years ago. This is now, I think, 4 years ago or something like that. And then since then, since I last spoke to them, because they blocked my phone number now, they won't let me call them. They won't accept my phone calls at all, actually. Then they see what happened in the House of Commons when all 400 of them clapped for this Nazi Hunka, along with Zelensky, another Nazi. And then since then, the evidence by the Russians of Nazi nationals being supported by NATO, including Canada. So I would think that, you know, since they blocked me from calling them the center in Los Angeles, they must surely be secretly paying much closer attention to my statements to them back then, and how everything that I had stated has come true exactly as I said it would. The House of Commons here and the Jewish MPs who are supposed to defend me and my wife are all just now pretending that the Hunka incident just doesn't matter. You know, you have to understand that there's a difference in conscience now with my Jewish brothers and sisters who are in with the governments of Canada, okay? Remember that back in, I think it was 1963, I don't have the date near me, when the Mossad, Israel's Mossad back then, found out that Eichmann was hiding in South America. And he was a war criminal, just like Hunka, okay? Although more of a war criminal than Hunka. War criminal's a war criminal. Does it really matter how many Jews they murder? Whether it's 5 Jews, 10 Jews, 1 Jew, does it really matter? The bottom line is Israel went after Eichmann, and they sent the Mossad to South America, who kidnapped him and risked their necks because they did it covertly without the permission of the government of the country in origin where Eichmann was living. And they kidnapped him, risking getting him on a plane that, you know, for Israel. Okay, that's how badly they wanted this Nazi war criminal. Now, in contrast, if you look at what happened with Hunka in the House of Commons here, look what's happened. They don't even care. My Jewish brothers and sisters in the House of Commons don't even care. They don't care. Look at them. They've just basically let it go. That's incredible. One would think that the Jewish community here would be up in arms over that their own Jewish MPs, Zionists on Parliament Hill, literally just let it go. No Jew lets that go. If it was Simon Wiesenthal, let me tell you folks something. If Simon Wiesenthal were here right now, alive, and he saw that the government of Canada clapping for this Nazi junta, all of them, all 400 of them, including Jewish Zionists, who are MPs in the House of Commons, and then they literally ignored it after that. They just walked away. These are Jews in the House of Commons, walked away. Simon Wiesenthal would have a stroke. He would turn around. I know what he'd say. He'd say, these are Nazi supporters. My own Jewish people supporting a Nazi. That's what he would say. Well, how else do you put it? How else do you know? So over the years now, I warned Simon Wiesenthal Center that Canada is Nazifying. I warned them of this 5 years ago. Then the Trudeau government comes out with this Bill C-63. Now, and C-19 and then Harper's C-51 years ago. The C-51 bill was really designed by Stephen Harper against people like my wife and I, because Harper's a Nazi, okay? And he was a supporter of neo-Nazi recruitment and security in the police, okay, in Quebec and Ontario. He's very much in support of that. And he had to cover up our case as well. The Bill C-51 by Stephen Harper years ago, passing it in the House of Commons, using what happened on Parliament Hill is just simply an excuse. The purpose of C-51 was to censor Canadians with any evidence, criminal evidence, against state politicians like Stephen Harper and others in the House of Commons. That's what C-51 was all about. It was not about terrorism or fighting terrorism or anything else. Trudeau never eliminated it at all. Harper gave the power of the police to go around and hack people and censor them. If any evidence against the state or its government, he gave the police the right, without having to go before a judge, to censor anyone with criminal evidence against the state. That's what they did to us. I would say that C-63 has a lot more to do with my wife and I's case against the government than perhaps anything else. That's why Trudeau's pulling this. Why is a bit of a mystery. Okay? Why, after all these years, he would do that is a bit of a mystery. What it tells me is that what's happened here, and over the last 4 or 5 years, I've seen this. I've seen increased violence by Nazi, pale, white, tall skinheads in the police. I've witnessed in the United States, Canada, the UK, Germany, more and more beatings of protesters by these Nazi balds and all their haired recruits that are human. I've witnessed attacks by police beating up protesters, throwing them to the ground. What I've noticed is this new Nazi infiltration of our police across Canada have no tolerance for protesters whatsoever, and they want to beat them and torture them and arrest them. This is the one big thing that's stood out. And I'm going to tell you something. It also proves that these Nazi balds are a collective. Okay, these Nazi balds are a security collective in NATO states, because we're seeing the same kinds of physical brutality and human rights violations against protesters by these Nazi skinhead balds in security here in Canada, in security in the UK, in the security of Germany, and the security of France. And they're starting to do this in the United States as well. I'll give you an example. About in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I was scanning YouTube. A video popped up of this Nazi skinhead bald in Virginia jumping out of his police vehicle and literally almost beating a man to death in a wheelchair. In the UK, I've seen skinheads in the police pushing protesters to the ground. In one case, it was an elderly lady, maybe not elderly, in her 50s or early 60s. Well, still, that's elderly. This policeman pushed her right to the ground. He ordered her to take her signs off. She had signs for protest. Ordering her to remove the signs, she refused. He threw her to the ground. I've seen this spectacle everywhere. We saw it with the freedom protesters here in Ottawa. Now, these are These are a push by the police here, who are building up a huge Nazi security Reich, trying to push the government, not necessarily push them, but trying to get the government to now pass bills, because there's a substantial number of Nazi fascists in the police who now want the suppression of any kind of publications that reflect upon them. You need to understand that as neo-Nazism spreads in our security apparatus, when you have Nazis spreading and recruiting insecurity across our country, you better bank on the fact that there's going to be more criminal beatings and criminal threats and physical violence by these Nazi balls in the police right across Canada against Canadian citizens. And as the Nazis grow, so do their human rights violations, and the human rights violations numbers increase across the country, right? So, and most of these are being covered up by them and the government's control of news media across the country, okay? So therefore, a lot of these atrocities by these Nazis and the police against Canadian citizens is going unreported to the UN, okay? So obviously, in this kind of decree by Trudeau, he's cloned the Reichstag fire decree with this C-63. I mean, you can. I'll read you the decree right now, and then you can compare it to Trudeau's Bill C-63, and you'll find they're both the same. I'll read it. The Reichstag fire decree. The decree suspended important provisions of the German Constitution, especially those safeguarding individual rights and freedoms and due process of law. Now, the restrictions are listed below, and what these restrictions are is they're literally taking away of individual rights and freedoms. For example, you're not allowed the right any further to assembly. You're not allowed the right of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, removal of all restraints on police investigations. Now, the removal of all restraints on police investigations, each one of these has a meaning, several meanings. Now, when they say removal of all restraints on police investigations, they have to remove all restraints on police investigations when right to assembly, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press are now criminal. Okay? Free to arrest and incarcerate political opponents. This is the other reason for the removal of all restraints on police investigations, is because they're now given the right to arrest and incarcerate political opponents without specific charges, and dissolve political organizations and suppress publications. So, the reason for the removal of all restraints on police investigations by Adolf Hitler was due to the list that I've just read you, so that they can go after people and arrest them and charge them for violating these things. Because, you see, that's what Trudeau's doing with his Bill C-63. We already have a situation in Canada where there has been a removal of all acts by the police, because the police get away in our country with every single act they commit that's illegal against the Canadian people. And the reason for this is because the government's protecting them, and all the oversight in our country that was legitimate, that controlled crimes by the police and violations of people's rights and freedoms by the police, all those control strings and oversight that were legitimate are either delegitimized with corrupted people, or those institutions have been eliminated altogether. The independent police oversight that we have now, to my wife and I here, has been proven to be corrupt both in Quebec and in Ontario. Both independent police investigations departments here in Ontario and Quebec are both corrupted, because they covered up stuff against my wife and I that were committed against us by the police. They covered for them, okay? And that includes the RCMP. Now, another thing I'd like to point out in this video is that what's not here, there's a couple of things. Well, one thing I'm going to tell you about right now, the other one I'll get to later, is that the other law that Hitler changed is that when a German citizen wants to file a complaint against the police, okay, Hitler changed the policy to, instead of filing a complaint against the police, in Germany, which would include the Gestapo, the Kripo, at least, if not also maybe the SS. I mean, I'm not sure because they were military. But as far as the Gestapo and the Kripo went, Hitler changed the rules there too, where he had indicated that if you want to file a complaint against the police, you have to file it with the Gestapo. Okay, well, that's what Canada's government did. They did the same thing. They cloned Hitler here, where now if you want to file a complaint against the police, with the RCMP, for example, if you want to file a complaint against them, you have to go to them and file the complaint, and they investigate it if it's against them, okay? In regards to other law enforcement detachments that have independent investigations departments, they're apparently independent. These are all fraudulent and not true. They're not independent. Okay? So as a result of these things, many violations of the Canadian people across the country being violated by the police in different arenas, and there's just nothing you can do about it. The government's giving them complete cover. Every province is covering all the corruption in their police. We've been corruption for decades, and there's no way to stop it. Okay, and here's what happens. When it gets to a point where it's really bad across a nation, that's when Hitler was planning, okay, to kill off the Jewish race and kill off all opponents of the Nazi Reich. He knew he had to do this. He did it beforehand. So he brought in the Reichstag fire decree because he knew that his plans against the German people and the Jewish people, that the people of Germany would not go for that. So he had to create the Reichstag fire decree to get away with it. Now, in the government of Canada's case regarding C-63, what they're doing with C-63 is they already have existing cases. Ours is one of the biggest ones against them already. And now they're moving to stop all cases against them, okay, from different people in Canada by doing this with this Reichstag C-63 fire decree that Trudeau's going to try and implement. And they've already committed, the other reason is, is because they already have recruited. The Nazi recruitment going on in Canada in security is something you got to see to believe. You cannot monitor it. You cannot see how fast the recruitment is going across the country. You can only judge the recruitment by cloned Hitler acts by police that are getting caught and videotaped. And you see, and this is what's been going on, okay, here in our country. People are videotaping it and posting it on YouTube. And so what's happening here is that we're starting to see the public across the country, various public people are starting to post videos on YouTube of Nazi police committing crimes cloned from the Hitler Reich. And as this increases, because the size of the recruitment of Nazis in the police across the country increases, this means more Hitler policies and brutality being used against the public. That's another reason why Trudeau has come out with this C-63. Okay? So I'm just trying to explain this to people. Now, there's a problem here for the Jewish community, and this is kind of set up perfectly. And I know what's going on. Because after the Reichstag fire decree and the Enabling Act, which both go together for the same purposes as I just read you, next after that is the Nuremberg laws. And these were created particularly for the Jewish race. So now that we have Trudeau and his parliament committed to this Reichstag fire decree, because that's what it is. Like I said, if you listen to my description of the Reichstag fire decree, and then you compare it with Trudeau's Reichstag fire decree that he is going to try and pass in the House of Commons, and then you compare it also to the arrests of British people in the UK for posting legal comments. Okay, they're very the comments are all legal. Here's the thing: in order to get away with it, in order for the British to get away with it, the British government, this means that prior to them bringing in Hitler's Reichstag fire decree to suppress the freedoms of speech by the people. Obviously, the British government, for quite some time prior to that, was getting enough Nazi recruited judges to sit on the benches of the British courts who would defend these actions by criminalizing the victims and giving them a sentence. So that's what I'm trying to tell you. You cannot, see, here's the thing. The British government cannot bring out the Reichstag fire decree against the people of Great Britain unless they have enough Nazis in the police to enforce it, and they have enough judges on the bench to enforce it prior to releasing the bill and making it law. They've already got to have enough Nazis in the police and enough judges on the bench to enforce it, because it's against the British Constitution. As far as I can see, the Labour Party of the British Parliament and the Tories, the Conservatives, have breached the British Constitution of rights of the people. Okay, so what they do is, and Canada's been doing this a long time actually, they get enough corrupted judges, okay, on the bench to impose criminal sentences. They get enough of them on the bench before they pass the bill. So this means that Trudeau wants to try and pass this legislation in the House of Commons, this Reichstag 63 garbage. But in order to have it enforced, okay, the Trudeau government, the opposition parties, have to have enough Nazis in the policing system and enough Nazi judges appointed to the bench who are waiting to start trying people on the Reichstag C-63 bill that he's trying to get through Parliament. Do you understand? And so, because the problem lies in the fact that if the Trudeau government passes the bill without having already recruited Nazis on the bench in the criminal justice system, along with Nazis in the police, if they don't have enough judges and police Nazified to arrest people based on his Reichstag 63, then what's going to happen is you're going to see the judges disagree with the government and throw out a majority of the cases as unconstitutional, you see? So before the government of Canada can make this bill law, okay, and the opposition, they have to have enough people in the judicial system, on the bench and in the police, in order for the judges to go along with this garbage, okay? So obviously Trudeau's covered his ground, and the thing is you won't find out until after the bill's passed. You won't find out until it's made into law. And then all these corrupted judges are going to violate the Charter of Civil Rights in Canada and start prosecuting people. And that's when people, like, this is what's happened in Great Britain, eh? See, I think that earlier, after they passed this bill in Great Britain and the UK, I think the people of the UK thought that the judges would throw it out, right? Would throw out every single case as unconstitutional, illegal. I think that's what the British people thought, but the British government covered their ground. They made sure that they recruited Nazi judges in the bench in the UK. Okay, and you got to remember too, the British government, oh, they're bad. Remember that it's the same British government, okay, now listen to me, it's the same British government of the UK who's been supplying arms to the Nazi Anzac battalion in the UK. Or I mean, in the Ukraine. So here we have one of the allocated NATO states by the Russian President Vladimir Putin stating that the UK, out of the other NATO states as well, supplying arms to the Nazi Anzac battalion in the Ukraine. Okay? Now, you can see that based on what I've just told you, that this is not communism. That's the next thing we're going to dig into, this garbage. Okay? The governments of the UK and Canada, because now, like, as far as my my case at the ICC goes, in the beginning it was about Canada's Nazification and Nazi policies used against my wife and I, And the Nazi policies they used also showed great anti-Semitic hatred for the Jewish people and the Torah and Jacob in the Torah, you see. This is it. So that's what I'm trying to say. Is that the Reichstag fire decree was a preamble to the Nuremberg laws, and I'll read you the Nuremberg laws right now. These were designed against the Jewish people. The restrictions were also designed against the Jewish people as well. But the point here is when Hitler first enacted the Reichstag fire decree, he went after German political dissidents, for which there was a lot of. He had to get rid of all of them and lock them up in Dachau, so that he wouldn't have any opponents politically. Okay, so that's what he aimed for first, and then the Jews came afterwards. Okay, so the Nuremberg laws are a set of laws after the restrictions aimed strictly at the Jewish people, and I'll read it to you, because I read this to Simon Wiesenthal Center years ago. I wonder if they understand now what's going on. Random attacks on Jews and Jewish property. Police and courts no longer protect Jews. You also find that some of the Nuremberg laws against the Jewish people intertwine with the restrictions up above. You'll find, for example, random attacks on Jews and Jewish property. Number 2, police and courts no longer protect Jews. Well, that's what it says up here. It says here, under the restrictions, free to arrest and incarcerate political opponents. Okay? So the same thing applied to the Jews. Police and courts no longer protect Jews. Now, the only reason why the police and the courts no longer protected the Jews, now this is a very important point, because what this means in the UK and possibly in Canada is that the police and the courts are no longer going to protect the British people and their freedom of speech. That's what it means, okay? So it's the same thing applied here. The police and courts no longer protect the Jews, which essentially means, you know, if you kind of get the bottom line on this, what it means is that the police and courts no longer give rights to the Jewish people at all, period, to defend themselves or to fight for themselves. And now, in order for the police and the courts to no longer protect the Jews, means that Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler had to get rid of all of the police who would protect the Jews, and would have to get rid of all the judges on the bench that would protect the Jews. Do you understand? Well, that's what the UK's done with the Reichstag fire decree that they're using against the British people. Jews no longer allowed electrical, optical equipment, bicycles, typewriters, records or recorders. Again, when we read this, it's important to understand. Let me read it again. I'll read it slower. Jews no longer allowed electrical, optical equipment, bicycles, typewriters, records and recorders. Well, what does this all mean? Well, why would Hitler take away Jews' rights to a bicycle and typewriters? We'll just use that as one of the examples, because I'm not going to go through all of them. Well, the term bicycles for Hitler also meant cars, trains, planes, boats, ships. Do you understand? When you read bicycles here, what this really means is that the Jewish people had no right to any form of transportation whatsoever. That's what it meant, because that's what he imposed. The term typewriters, what does that mean? Well, Jews are not allowed typewriters. Well, the reason why Jews were not allowed typewriters is because the German government didn't want Jewish people writing their journals on typewriters of the tortures they were going through by the police and security and the courts. They didn't want any of it recorded at all. And that's also the reason for the Jewish people were not allowed records or recorders. Back in those days, in 33, 34, they had record players. And these record players could spin a vinyl record on them, and you could record on it. Very few people know that. You had to be excessively wealthy to afford one of these phonographs where you could record on the record as well. Passports for Jews to travel abroad restricted. Jewish passports denied permanently. Jews' radios confiscated. And the reason for the radio confiscations was that to keep the Jewish people out of the media spotlight and to keep them from knowing things, okay, what was going on. Because these would be reports on the radios of the time period. The Nazis loved to get on the radio and tell the German people how a Jew committed this crime, or the SS or the SA or the Gestapo went in and arrested 5 Jews. You know what I'm saying? And the Jewish people would know by radio broadcasts what's going on with the police in regards to the Jewish communities. Do you see what I'm saying here? Jews evicted from homes without reason or notice. Yes, that's right. They all lost their homes. Jews were forbidden to use the telephone. New law designates Jews as subjects of the Reich. Psychiatric Nazi diagnosis of Jews for genocide. The Nazi High Command denies atrocities against Jews to the international community. All right? Now, all of these, except for 2, were applied against my wife and I. Just let me see here. I didn't write it in here. Did I? One of the laws that's not applicable to us isn't even in here. Okay, let me just check this. Yes, I didn't even write it in, because Jews were not allowed to marry Gentiles. Okay? So, now, the important thing here, see, this is where there's a bit of a deception regarding Melissa Landsman, the MP on Parliament Hill with Poilievre. The Jewish people think that in the community here, because they have MPs in the Conservative Party and the Liberals, they think that they're going to be protected from Adolf Trudeau's Reichstag Fire Decree 63. Okay? That's not the case, because here's the point. Next after the restrictions comes the Nuremberg laws. So what does this mean regarding Trudeau's Bill C-63? It means that soon after C-63 is in place, that Trudeau's going to come out with the Nuremberg laws against the Jewish people. But I'm going to tell you something. These restrictions are going to be applied against the Jewish people here. I'll tell you that right now, that they're going to find out if he passes this law. It's not just the Gentiles here. The Jewish people are going to start finding, the Jewish community here are going to start finding that they're having troubles with their own speech and freedom of the press and freedom of assembly. This is going to happen. I'm just telling the public this, that this is going to happen. I was the one that came forward I was the first person in Canada to come out with the allegation that Parliament Hill is Nazified and they were Nazifying security. I actually came out with this allegation back in 2009 because these Nazi balds were hired by the Ontario Liberal government to be guards in our detention centers in Toronto, and I was in one of these detention centers. They tried to gas me with a barbecue above my cell, and the vent was sucking it in, and they were playing German polka music while this was going on. I wish to indicate that this video is also for the ICC, International Criminal Court in The Hague, along with the Russian Federation here in Ottawa, and also their ministry in Moscow. Okay. For my wife and I, it's very concerning because Trudeau is trying to cover up our Nazi case against him and his parliament and security by being able to use C-63 to make some kind of allegations against my wife and I. This is what he's up to. Okay? And I'm telling all of you that Poilievre is in with him. He's absolutely in with him. Don't kid yourselves with Pierre Poilievre, because in our case, Harper was right in there with the Liberals, trashing my wife and I in Quebec, trashing our boats. He was doing this. Okay? So, if I will tell you that 3 or 4 years ago, the Conservative mouthpieces in the House of Commons were not... See, here's the other problem, too, and I want to get into this before I talk about that. I want to tell you people that see my video, the ICC and also the Russian Federation and anyone else who can listen to this, that you have to understand that if you're against the government of Canada, okay, if you have evidence against them, any kind of evidence, they will suppress it. Okay, that's the whole point of the suppression. They have been suppressing my wife and I, by the way, for over 10 years. They've been violating us and censoring us. All our phones they've hacked. Since 2014, they've hacked all our phones. When they started attacking our boats, Jacob's Goshen and Jacob's Ladder, we tried to report it on our phones, and we did, but they suppressed it. And here's the other thing. As I explained to the Russian Federation, the American government, the White House and their State Department, completely protected Canada from Nazi war crime allegations by my wife and I. Now I'm going to explain some about Nazi war crimes. Let's get into that for a minute. Because I was trying to think of a way to have Canada's government criminally charged by the ICC for war crimes against my wife and I and all the people that they attacked at the freedom protests. Now, there's a twist in this thing, in that the question is, regarding war crimes are a time of war, when two countries are at war with each other, and one side in the war starts committing war crimes and human rights atrocities against prisoners of war. Okay, and also the other country's citizens, women and children, killing them, committing atrocities, okay, as you know. But how this essentially occurs is really psychological. So we have one country that's a fascist country with a Nazi government and Nazi military and security. And the country they're invading is a democratic country that's not Nazified. So what we have going on here really is a forced change in ideology, where that country and its military leapfrogs into a democratic country, trying to alter their political ideology from democratic to fascist, okay? So really, to me, it's a matter of psychology, where it's psychological, okay? So why am I saying that? Because psychologically, what's happened here in Canada is we have an alien political ideology which is secretly trying to take over the country, its security and government of Canada, and convert them over to that ideology that is historically known as the Nazi Reich, which is what is going on here, against the will of the Canadian people. It's like, another example is, it would be like, a country with a neighbor country next to it, and that country's leader, the best of friends with the country next door and its leader and its government, and then all of a sudden that country commits a surprise military attack against the country that thought they were their friends. So it was a deception, right? And the country wasn't expecting that attack because they had a great relationship. Okay, there was nothing wrong with it. There was no reason, and they can't figure it out. Like, what just happened, right? So that's what's going on with the government of Canada, governments of Canada, the Liberals and the Conservatives of the entire country, and their security. What they're doing is they're trying to Nazify the country against the will of the Canadian people, without the Canadian people even knowing it. And one of the ways they're able to get away with this is when you see people being beaten up in protests here, not just the freedom protests, but I saw the Nazi skinheads beating up people in another protest here after the freedom protesters, and other atrocities being committed across the country by Nazi balls in the police against citizens of other provinces, which I know is going on. You need to kind of understand this, that these people that are doing this are evil. They're evil. And they're going against the will. See, the thing is, the people they're beating up think it's communism. See, you see old broadcasts coming out of China, where the Chinese people protest, and then the government calls in the police. The police go in with shields and beat them up and throw them on the ground and arrest them and throw them in Chinese paddy wagons. Well, you see, the thing here is the Canadian government's Nazification of the state includes using communism as a deception to the Canadian people, making them believe that the attacks against the Canadian people are communist, that the government's communist. Well, they're not communist. That's impossible. If they were communists, they wouldn't clap for a Nazi in Parliament Hill or Zelensky, knowing that that he is supporting Nazi nationalist militia attacking Russia. So, no, they're not communists. I'm fed up with Mr. Poilievre giving Trudeau all the cover he needs because they would rather, when we have Nazi security attack policies against the Canadian people cloned from Hitler, it's an embarrassment to the government. So they have to figure out a way to get away with it so that people don't know it's actually the police conversion to Nazism. So the government Poilievre starts accusing Trudeau of being a communist. That's what he's been doing. Now, the thing here is about this is Trudeau is really a Nazi, but Trudeau ducked into communism to cover up the fact he's a Nazi, because the two go hand in hand. There's many things about communism and Nazism that are very similar when it comes to in a communist state where the people are protesting, okay? The communist leader, depending on what kind of dictator he is, may send in the police to break up the protesters and arrest many of them, okay? Well, the same applies with the Nazis. They do the same thing, you see. So, in fact, the House of Commons is using the communist label to cover up the fact that they're actually Nazifying the state. And that's what they're trying to tell. And that really makes me mad that they're getting away with that garbage. And I'm hoping that this video here will make it clear what exactly the House of Commons has been doing. And now we've started hearing, like I've heard some reasons for hope on this, because in the riots in the UK, I noted in some of the videos that there were people chanting fascism. Now those people chanting fascism, they have it right on money. It's not communism, it's fascism. I've heard in the UK riots people accusing the Der Stürmer SS, which is what he is, of being a communist, that they're communist policies regarding suppression of the people's right to freedom of speech. But more and more, what we're hearing, we're hearing both now, both allegations coming out of the same peoples in the UK, where some are accusing the government of being Nazis, fascists, the other ones are accusing them of communists, which means the people are trying to figure out which applies. Now, you could say that it doesn't matter whether it's communism that applies or fascism. You could say it doesn't matter since both ideologies commit the same kinds of acts against the freedoms of the people. But here's the problem in this thinking. The problem is Nazism is 1,000 times more dangerous than communism. This is the point, right? There's no greater danger than the repeat of Nazism. And communism does not come close to Nazism, unfortunately. And those that think it does, you can forget it right now. It just doesn't. We've had dictators in countries like the Khmer Rouge, okay? Now, he was in a country in Asia, the Khmer Rouge, and he was not a communist. He was just a dictator, but he murdered millions of his own people, literally. He murdered them. He was running a human murdering tyranny, the Khmer Rouge. Okay, and he was not a communist, you see? Nor was he a democratic person. He was just simply a war criminal of great proportion. Most Canadians are going to have to leave the country. They're going to have to try and get out of the country, but don't bother going to NATO countries, because you have to go to countries that are enemies of NATO in order to escape this Reichstag decree. That's what you have to do. For those of you who feel endangered by it, you definitely are. If you got something on the government, or you have a reason to hate Trudeau and Poilievre, all of them, or you have a reason to hate your provincial leaders, and you've stated these things on YouTube or in person on the phone, they're going to nail you.
Anyone had a sign that said Trudeau.
Yeah, anyone that had a sign saying F Trudeau got nailed. Okay? So, but you need to understand, it's not just Trudeau. I say to you, Canadian people, you need to listen to me. Poilievre is a fascist. Okay? He says he's not, but he is. Okay, here we have a clone copy of the Reichstag fire decree causing chaos in the UK. That's the brunt of it. And then here we have Trudeau wanting to follow the same guidelines. Now, the Reichstag fire decree and C-63 are exactly the same. Now, that means that bill is illegal. It's a violation of the Charter. Our Charter of Rights, by the way, is different than the UK's. The UK's Constitution for the people. Ours is different. Theirs is actually more restrictive on its own without the Reichstag fire decree that the conservative Tories brought in regarding speech. Ours is better than theirs in that our Constitution our Charter of Civil Rights does not indicate the limits of free speech. Hey, this is where Trudeau has a real problem, as opposed to the UK, because the UK, their Charter of Civil Rights, there are certain things in their Charter of Rights that restrict them already prior to the decree being brought in there. But Canada doesn't have that, so that's in the favor of the Canadian people. If you go into the Charter of Civil Rights for Canada, it says you have a right to freedom of speech, you have a right to the freedom of the press, you have the right to thought, opinion, and belief. Okay, it does not say, like it does, I believe, in the British Charter, and I'm not sure about this. I thought I heard someone reading a little bit of it in a video. But ours doesn't say you do not have the right to hate someone. It doesn't even say you don't have the right to have racial hatred, you know. Ours are very broad. So therefore, Trudeau's bill is just not applicable because there was nothing in the Charter of Civil Rights under that heading that indicated some of these restrictions already. It's not there. It's just, you can say what, like in Canada, you can say whatever you want to whoever you want, and it doesn't affect the Charter. Okay. All right, you can say whatever you want because it's not in the Charter. If it's not there, then there's nothing they can do. So in this respect, we're ahead of the game. And plus, here's the other thing. In Canada, there is no real hate speech here. Like I told you people, I'm going to go now. I want to keep this down to 60 minutes. I've been on YouTube for 5 years. Okay, here. I cannot find one Canadian on YouTube who used any kind of hate speech on YouTube against anyone. Not in the comments, not in videos. And I'm going to tell you something, a majority of YouTube up here is mostly American content, okay? And international content. There's really not a lot of Canadian content on YouTube, and I'm going to tell you one of the reasons for that. Because the Canadian government's censoring it. There should be a lot more Canadians on YouTube on the main page because this is Canada. But the problem with that is for the government is there would be a lot of Canadians on YouTube condemning the governments across the country and the police, you see. So that's another reason why we don't see too many Canadians on YouTube is because they're being censored, because what they have to say on YouTube is not going on the main page of YouTube because the government's doing that. The government's doing that. So, I told Simon Wiesenthal Center 5 years ago, and I told the Russians even before that NATO's going to Nazify. I warned them of this. I warned the Jewish community here of this. I warned some of the rabbis here of this. I warned the Jewish people. I warned the Israeli mission in New York, and now it turns out they've applied Nazi SS policies and atrocities against the Palestinian people. And I'm an expert on the Holocaust as well as the day-to-day operations of German Reich security against peoples all over Germany, and the day-to-day threats, tortures, and acts against them, surveillance. And I can tell you right now, okay, your government of Canada is guilty. Okay? In the UK, they got a real problem because I'm going to tell you something before I go. I'm going to go a little over 60 minutes here. Based on my observations of what has happened in the UK regarding the riots, usually, and this is a little bit unfortunate as well, I heard about the murders of 3 children at this concert thing, Taylor Swift, I think it is. And generally speaking, that would not cause a riot all over the UK. What you have is you have a bunch of people, the populace of the UK, where a powder keg is already built up to explode because of Der Sturmer and the Tories' Reichstag fire decree, arresting UK citizens, accusing them of racism against Muslims, and hate speech against them, as they refer to it, or some sort, or they're trying to mince words or make people find people guilty who are telling the judge, well, no, that wasn't my intention, but to the judge, that doesn't matter. You got to have a Nazi judge in order to get a conviction anyway. Because I know about several cases in the German Reich courts. You got to remember, 15,000 Jews were sent through the Reichstag criminal court system, framed with crimes they never committed, and they were sent to Auschwitz, Birkenau, and other death camps to be exterminated. So, and these were setups and fraudulent charges against Jewish people. So I'm just telling you that you have to have a powder keg in place already. So the powder keg that was getting bigger and bigger and ready to explode was the fact that the British government was going after people and arresting them for making comments and statements in media, Facebook and others. Okay, which created this powder keg across the country, and all it took was something to light it off, okay, to finally make it explode, and it was the murders of 3 children that made the powder keg go off. It's not just the children. The rioters are talking about the arrests of citizens and a 2-tiered police system in favor of, they're saying, Muslim immigrants have all the rights to do whatever they want and not be arrested, while the British people don't have that right or being arrested. So that's what they're referring to by a 2-tier police system. But the reality of it is, actually, it's a Nazi police system. There does come a point where, where a country and its government seem to, and it's true, even here in Canada I've noted this, where the immigrants that come to Canada, for example, seem to be better treated than they do their own poor Canadian citizens, leaving them out in the streets with tents, while all the immigrants get the shelters. And when they get all the shelters, then the Canadian people who are poor have to live outside to an extent. So that's true. I mean, there are things about immigration that are true. No offense to Islamic or Muslim people, but the Canadian government's doing that. They put all these immigrants in all the nice shelters that are homes and stuff like that, and they give them lots of money. But the Canadian people already out in the streets who have nowhere to go are one of the reasons why they don't. And one of the reasons why there's not more funding to the Canadian people who need it is because of the immigrants. I mean, this is true. And there's no lie there. How do I feel about it? Well, I don't think it's fair. But the question is what I'm saying, is it racist? Well, no, it's not racist. Because I'm not a racist. I'm partially Jewish, and I'm a Christian Jew. I'm a fighting Christian Jew, though. So, and I'm also Orthodox, so I have both. So I'm not allowed to be a racist. You can't. Not if you're a Christian Orthodox Jew, you're not a racist. You can't stand racism because you realize the racist murders of 6 million of your people in Nazi Germany, and you recognize the racist murders of 38,000 Palestinians and their people by a Jew who's related to you and his government, okay? And that makes me sick enough that I'm related. Sometimes it's hard for me to wear my kippah because I'm angry. Sometimes it's hard for me to wear it because of the murders of the Palestinian people. It's sometimes difficult. I always wear it, but it's like, you know, you don't want to be associated with the Jewish race, you know, after that kind of thing. You know, they murdered 38,000 Palestinians without even a thought. And these are people, these Zionist Nazis of the Israel's government, they're constantly quoting the Holocaust. Here they are constantly quoting the Holocaust. They know how many of our people got murdered in the Holocaust by Nazi Germany. And here they turn around and murder 38,000 Palestinians. Now, just that by itself, there's something very wrong there. I mean, there's something's gone amok there. So, you know, they're accusing Iran. They're saying that Iran's a Nazi state. No, they're not. That's not actually true. Iran is not a Nazi state. Are you kidding? Iran has Iranian Jewish synagogues in Tehran. And I recently heard an interview of Jews living in Iran, Jewish Iranians, who go to the synagogue. The only complaint they have against the government of Iran is they have a bit of a hard time finding food. You know, this is their main complaint. If Iran was a Nazi state, then Jewish Iranians would be locked up. You know what I'm saying? I'm sure you people understand that. So I have a bit of a cold. Only a little one, thank God. Amen, Father, thank you. No, I'm going to go all out, do my own thing to get at the government here with my trailer and my signs, which I'm going to be going out on the road with all over Ottawa and the international community. And because I want Canadians to understand that we are dealing with a Nazi Reich on Parliament Hill and a massive buildup of neo-Nazism in our security apparatus. Listen, I was the first person to come forward about this in 2009, actually, because they tried to gas me in Toronto and play German polka music, Nazi balls in this jail. And at that time, they were recruiting males and females to join them and shave their heads. They were doing that then, and since then, all that's happened here is it's increased. Now, I want to tell you folks something else. I have made... Well, just to be approximate about this, I've at least maybe called Trudeau's office in the last 5 years 300 or 400 times. And I've called the Conservative O'Toole and Scheer and Poilievre probably 200 or 300 times, just averaging it out. And I've explained to these politicians in recorded messages on Parliament Hill the Nazi crimes against my wife and I, the application of the Nuremberg laws and the restrictions, the government being able to zero in on my wife and I from 2014 onward with illegal censoring because they were covering up all the Nazi criminal acts against us, which there are many. It's not just our boats. There's a lot more criminal acts against us that were committed. We tried to file police reports 5 or 6 times. All of the attempts rejected. When the police came, they wanted to arrest us. Do you understand? This actually happened once, by the way, where they arrested me when I turned over evidence regarding the attacks on my boat, Jacob's Ladder, the first one in a boatyard in Quebec. As it turned out, the owners and a Hell's Angel and the police all together, they were attacking our boat, and then they had the police, Nazis and the police covering it up for them. When I took in the evidence to the police and the photographs, pretty well narrowing down the persons responsible, who were the owners of the boatyard, or one of them, they arrested me and accused me of threatening a mayor. I never threatened the mayor. Okay, when I confronted this policeman, I said, "Show me your evidence. Show me where I called this mayor and left him a message threatening him." Okay, then this policeman says to me, "No, I'm not going to do that." And he says to me, "Oh, well, you 50% threatened him." I said, No, officer. I said, either I threatened the guy with criminal harm in the recording, or I didn't. There's no 50% anything, right? And as a result of that, they locked me up in a mental ward in Saint Jean-sur-Richelieu, Quebec, against my will, and that was unlawful, okay, for a cover-up, because my wife and I had this big journal and all these photographs. My wife walked to the U.S. border crossing there at Rouse's Point and gave DHS the package, okay? Well, I was in the nut house where they were trying to keep me there. They were trying to get me committed because of the evidence my wife and I collected in the photographs of vandalism against our boat. Okay, that's what happened, okay? That's just one story in itself. So, I'm just telling you that when you have evidence, okay, against the state, you know, if crime, any criminal acts against you are linked to the government, whether the government recruits criminal organizations on the streets, or they have, which is what they do have here, is they have gang members and Nazis in the police who are using their connections to street gangs to commit criminal acts against you and your family. This is the way they do it. I'm just telling you the way it works here, okay? Now, what I want to say is that I have given practically every piece of evidence of everything that happened to us to the office of Trudeau in over 500 phone calls, and to Poilievre, Scheer, and O'Toole in 200 or 300 phone calls. I've explained our whole case since 2009 in briefs about the most important points and places where government officials were Nazis or criminal gangs trying to murder me and my family. We have allegation against Canada's government, 2 counts of attempted murder on me, 1 count against my wife, and 2 counts of attempted murder of our newborn child in BC in 2006. So there's 3. So we have that as well, okay? And my wife filed a police report on hers because a policeman pulled out of traffic in 2017 here in Ottawa, tried to run her over. It was with intent. No question, it was with intent. He didn't have his emergency lights on or nothing. He just pulled out of traffic and aimed right for it. I understand why he did. Actually, we know why. So, I'm just giving you some briefs. So if you have evidence against the government, okay, they'll try and kill you. If they can't kill you, and they're still committing the crimes and so on, they're still doing these things, or they refuse to respond after you. See, here's the thing. What I was trying to say with calling Parliament Hill here to this Prime Minister of Canada, along with Poilievre and before him Andrew Scheer and O'Toole, is that the idea of explaining our case to them was to give them the opportunity to repent for what they've done and to start bringing in legislation based on our verbal testimony of what happened to us within the governments, okay, what they did to us, the crimes. And for them to bring in legislation in the House of Commons so that there would be restrictions from the police being able to do these things to people. And like the Nazis, here's the other important part I want to explain before I go. One of the things about the Nazi Reich and Adolf Hitler was that you got to remember that when Hitler went after all the Jewish people, these are my people, the Jewish race, okay? These are my people. Everything he did to them was covert and secret and away from public view, okay? For example, the railway systems where Jews were called in different cities all over Germany to go to the train station of that city, and they had to board certain trains, okay? Now, it's this a little bit tricky because I get this out of Schindler's List too, the movie. I've got it here by Steven Spielberg. Now, when Hitler started building his death camps, let me start with that first. First of all, Hitler built the death camps in Poland in strategic, isolated areas away from the populaces, okay? Treblinka was built in the middle of nowhere in a forest, okay, which was cleared for Treblinka. Auschwitz was the same thing in Birkenau, okay? All of the death camps were never located anywhere near city populaces, okay? And the train routes that he used, loading Jews on trains and shipping them off to the death camps, these routes took these trains, they never went through cities. Never. Okay? Because this had to be done in secret. So what we can say here is that Adolf Hitler and his security, he isolated all of the Jews that he murdered, trying to keep as much of it away from the populaces of Germany finding out in Germany's major metropolises like Munich, Stuttgart, Berlin. You need to remember that he did not want the German populace to know what he was doing to the Jewish people. So therefore, he had to keep their extradition to the death camps a secret from the German people. Now, why I'm mentioning this is because they do the same thing here in Canada. One of the problems here in Canada is that that's what the governments do and the police. They isolate their victims and nobody will get involved. No one. It's not like, when you see what happened during the freedom protests when this Christian congregation in Alberta, they met together in the church without masks on because they were very faithful, and the police showed up, okay, without a warrant, telling the pastor that he has to disperse the crowd because it's a COVID violation, the meeting in the church with no masks. Now, as far as I can remember, the pastor basically told him, well, you have no warrant, leave, get off my property, you don't have a warrant to come here. And they did leave. And when they came back, they had a warrant and they threw the pastor in jail and dispersed the people in the congregation, okay? And, you need to understand here that the Nazis always go after one person, 10 people, 50 people. It's always covert, and they depend on the fact that the witnesses will never get involved. One of the things my wife and I have noticed here in Ottawa is it's very difficult for the police to isolate us and threaten us because there's so many people here. There's always going to be witnesses on the streets. They follow my wife and I, but they're very careful because if we're downtown, we're around people. If they pull something, there's going to be witnesses, you see, and they don't want that. And this is another sure sign that they're Nazis, because Nazis, remember, like to isolate their victims in private. Okay, like they put, 10,000 Jews on one train with 10 cars, okay? And they've isolated all 10,000 Jews, locked them in these cars, and taken them to death camps to be gassed, okay? So it's all about isolating the victims. You see, and this is one of the problems that, or one of the things that was not learned about after the war. Okay? Which means that the crowds have to protect the victims, okay? The crowds have to witness the victims and what the police are doing to them, because they're trying to do it in such a way that the populace doesn't know that a person that they don't know, a fellow citizen, has been arrested for something they don't know, okay? So they're not there to protect the person from the police, okay? The Nazi system, in order to fight the police and the government, in the Nazi system, you have to have crowds of people protecting the victim, which means that in the case of the UK and other NATO countries, the crowds have to overwhelm the police and put them down, okay? And the courts. See, this is where the UK is going. The citizens of the United Kingdom, they're never going to bow to what the governments have pulled with the Reichstag fire decree. And all that's going to end up happening there, it's going to be a bloodbath. And you're going to have militia formed there. You're going to have hundreds of thousands of people in the UK who are building their own little armies to go and attack the police and the government to stop them. Now, it's a little more difficult there because the UK has a very large security apparatus and military to go with it, bigger than ours in Canada. It's going to be much harder for Trudeau to enforce this bill here because he doesn't have the resources to enforce it. Interestingly, also, I wish to point out that it's obvious to me, first of all, I'm going to tell you something. In order for the UK police to catch people commenting, they have to have some kind of mass surveillance program going on with every citizen in the UK posting things in different media, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. This means, I'm going to tell you what this means, because this is the bigger part which people need to understand. is that, for example, the Trudeau government and our security all by ourselves in our country, just our internal security, even our military, they do not have the capacity, okay, to keep millions of Canadians under surveillance to monitor what they're posting in order to charge them with violations of Trudeau's C-63. Now, what does this mean? This means that there has to be a united security collective of NATO states and their security gathering together outside of the UK. So what does this mean? Well, it means that in the UK, you're going to have, or outside of the UK, I mean, you're going to have French security in France, and German security, and other NATO country security outside of the UK who are going to be reporting to their Nazis in UK police about citizens in the UK who they have caught violating the UK law. Because in the UK, even then, here's the thing. In NATO countries, in each NATO country, they do not have enough security forces in the police or the military in each individual NATO country to keep all their populace under surveillance, okay, in order to charge these people with violating their hate speech laws pertaining to comments they're making in media. So what does this mean? Well, it means, let me give you an example. During in the House of Commons here in Ottawa, during the freedom protesters or just after, I can't remember, in the House of Commons, the Trudeau government admitted they had 33 million Canadians under mobile surveillance of their wireless phones, okay, and Androids and so on, tablets. Now, the thing that struck me about that was, first of all, the Canadian government internally, okay, with internal security, including the military, with all of our internal security in the police and military, the Canadian Prime Minister does not have enough people in the military and civilian security to monitor 33 million Canadians, which means that the Trudeau government went outside the country and he got other NATO governments and their security, okay, involved in monitoring 33 million Canadians. You see? It's the same thing in the UK. The United Kingdom does not have enough internal surveillance security to go after all of the hundreds of thousands or millions of UK citizens who get charged with posting comments in any of these media. Okay? They don't have it. All right? They don't have the capability. What this means is what I said a long time ago, and I'm going to repeat it, then I got to stop the video and upload it at some point. Is what this means is that NATO countries have a security collective, Nazi security collective, all of them, Canada, the United States, Great Britain, Germany and France at minimum, with more nations in the European community. They are working as a security collective, helping each other nail their own citizens for what they refer to as violations of the law regarding legal comments their citizens make in various media. Okay? That's what they have to be doing. Now, I had said that there's a Nazi collective in security in NATO states. It's a Nazi collective, and it's massive. And part of what they're doing, when you have a Hitler Reich, so you got to remember too that Adolf Hitler, this was something. See, Adolf Hitler, he didn't want war with the UK and the United States. That's not what he wanted. He wanted a pact with the United States and the UK. He didn't want war with the US and the UK. He wanted an agreement with them for a Nazi world, including Canada. He didn't want war with us. He wanted a Nazi agreement with us. He tried to recruit the United States government, Canada and the UK, into the Nazi fold. Well, we said no. If you look a little bit into the very sketchy plans of Adolf Hitler, and he won the war. You got to remember, Adolf Hitler didn't want to start the war until 1954. Yeah, he didn't want to start the war in 1939 against Poland and the UK and France. He wanted to start the war in 1954 because he needed to build up his military until 1954 in order to have a shot at winning the war against the West and European and Russia and China. So that's what I'm trying to tell you. Now, the other thing I want to tell you regarding that is that Hitler's plan was for 1,000-year Reich of the entire world, including the United States and Canada and Europe, Russia, China. He wanted a 1,000-year Reich of the whole world. So what we're seeing now is, you got to remember that what most people don't know, and I'm going to tell you now, is that Hitler had a plan. The one plan is taking over the world if he won the war, and the other plan was the world takeover of the Nazi Reich if he lost the war. There was two plans. Okay, and that's exactly what we're seeing happening now. Now, Hitler's three main enemies and those nations and races that he considered to be the most dangerous to the Nazi Reich were Russia, China, and the Jews. Okay? And if you look at the map of Hitler, when Hitler had his maximum expansion into European states, remember he was 10 miles from Moscow at one point. If you look at the map of Adolf Hitler, when he had expanded out of Germany at his maximum point before being forced back by the Allies on the Normandy beachheads and the Russians on the Eastern Front, when he was started getting forced out of Poland and the Ukraine and so on. If you look at the map of when he had maximally expanded into all these countries, the Ukraine, Poland, and other countries in Europe, okay? When you look at that map and you compare it to the NATO map now, you will see it's the same countries that NATO's taken over against Russia. What we have, it really is we have, again, Nazi Europe piled up at Russia's borders, because Hitler did the same thing. He owned all of Europe. He owned every country, invaded every country in Europe, okay? And he took them over, and they became part of the Reich, the Ukraine, Poland, and that brought him to the border with Russia. So we're seeing the same map now. That's what's going on. Now, they had to bring in Israel, the Nazi. See, Israel knew that NATO was Nazifying, okay? The Israeli Netanyahu government knew, okay? They knew that NATO was Nazifying Canada, Great Britain, Germany, and France, the four main ones, the United States as well. They knew there was Nazification going on, politically and in their security and military. The Israeli government knew this, okay? So they had a choice to make. It's either get away from NATO and the United States, in which case they would have to kick the United States out of Israel, and then suffer the consequences of a very angry Iran and other countries there. They would have had to taken them on their own. And of course, these other Middle Eastern countries would have had to insist that Israel be divided with the Palestinians. And of course, the Zionist government punished by Iran and the rest of them with no American help because they kicked them out of Israel. So Netanyahu knew that NATO was Nazifying. So he decided that he was going to bring Israel into the Nazi fold, which explains when, look, in the first stages of the Ukrainian conflict, the Israeli government, because I was monitoring all of this through reports from Israel, at first he would not supply arms to the Ukrainians. The Israelis would not supply any weapons, ammunition, nothing. They would just supply non-lethal equipment to the Ukraine. No guns, no bullets, no nothing, okay? They wouldn't do it. Then, about a year ago or less, Netanyahu changed his mind, and he decided he was going to start sending lethal weapons to the Ukraine. That's like him, when he did that, and he started doing that, that was instant approval of the Nazi Anzac Battalion right there, because some of those weapons reached the Anzac Battalion, who were Nazis. So this goes along with so what happened was Netanyahu had bowed to Nazism. That's what he did, and that's why what happened here in the House of Commons, they all saluted for Hunka, okay, a Nazi war criminal. They all clapped for him. And you note how the Zionist Jewish politicians on Parliament Hill that represent the Jewish communities in Canada never did a thing. They never went after Hunk after that, never said anything. They didn't, Melissa Landsman and the rest of them. And the reason for that is because, you see, had they went after the Israel, the Jewish state, and the Jewish people, along with Russia and China, then nations would have started saying the Nazis have risen again. The reason why they would have said that is because Hitler's three enemies that he wanted to obliterate were the Chinese and the Russians and the Jews. Okay, so they had to bring Netanyahu in. They had to bring Israel in. They had to bring in the Jewish communities in NATO states in through their Zionist politicians in NATO state governments and legislatures. So what's happening is, because they're recruited by the Nazis, the Jewish Zionists, they won't do anything, and won't condemn any Nazism now. And then the murders of the 38,000 Palestinians, which is cloned Nazi policy against the Jewish race. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's what's happened. This is what has happened, unfortunately. So I'm letting you all know on YouTube. I haven't posted a video in a while. I doubt I'll hardly get any views. They're restricting all my videos. I've got other videos on my YouTube account, which have nothing to do with this. There's hobbies and lathes and stuff like that on their videos. And they've restricted those too. Okay? Now, get a load of this. YouTube says I have a total of 1,600 views of all my videos. I should have tens of thousands of views, okay? It's Canada censoring me. That's why. They can't just censor some of your videos. Like I told you about the one from 3 years ago, my Nazi video against the Canadian government. What happened to my wife and I, my accusations. And I told you this, right? And I told you that video, I just went in there today, and I've still got only 45 views from 3 years ago. The video underneath me, which is Hunka, the Nazi, who should be sent to Russia and put to death as far as I'm concerned for the sake of the murders of Russians, Jews, and Poles. That video on Hunka, right below mine, has got 7 million views. You figure it out. And I got 45 views. And 3 years ago, what was the title of my video? Daniel and Jennifer Fitzgerald's Nazi case against Canada government and police. And here they're all clapping for the Nazi Hunka in the House of Commons. Well, there you go. I was right. I wasn't lying. So I mean, that's that. I mean, in a way, the Hunka video on Parliament right below mine, and I thank Wikipedia, because in my video on YouTube, the one from 4 years ago, Wikipedia, in my video, they placed their ad for the Holocaust right on my video. Thank you, Wikipedia. God bless all of you. It's unfortunate that the Jewish community here in Ottawa has made me enemies of theirs. They did it. I didn't do it. When they try to murder your wife, they try to murder your child, and they try to murder you, and Nazis are involved, and they wreck all your property and destroy it, and then the government censors you to cover it up. Okay? How are you going to feel? I mean, how are you going to feel? You know, you're going to be full of hatred for anyone who does not agree with the evidence. The evidence clearly shows that all of them on Parliament Hill are guilty of war crimes, Nazi policies, and crimes against my wife and I, and all our property and our children. That's what the case proves. But, you know, maybe it's a good thing. Animosity, yeah. Maybe it's a good thing 4 years has passed by, because now I have more evidence to add to our case. Because there's an intermixing here in our case, because some of the things they did to the freedom protesters, which are Nazi policies and Nazi crimes against them by security and the Trudeau government, these are intermixed with our case. It's the same people, okay? So that's why I can add that, what happened to the protesters here, to our case against, because the policies that the Trudeau government used against the protesters here were Nazi policies. Definitely. Not communist policies, Nazi policies. I know the difference. You got to have a keen eye. Like, for example, before I go, you're looking at millions of people in the UK who have no clue about the Hitler Reich. A lot of these people are young people, younger than me. They didn't study the Nazi Reich and Nazi security or the Holocaust, so they just don't know. They think it could be fascism or communism, but they're not sure, obviously. All they got to do is go look up Hitler's Reichstag fire decree, and they're going to find out very fast that their government has applied Hitler's Reichstag fire decree. Now, I've posted this on YouTube over the last few days, that it's the Reichstag fire decree. It's surprising me I haven't got any comments yet on this. Actually, I haven't had any comments since July 30th on YouTube. I'm a little surprised about that. I should have had some comments by now. They're blocking comments to me on and off, I guess. The point here is, as long as my wife and I don't talk about our case, as long as we don't, like, I was on YouTube there last week. There's this fellow named James. He does World News Report Today, and most of his reports are what the sun's doing, and the solar flares. He announces the flares coming towards Earth. He's a really nice guy. And then I made a comment to him, telling him about our case. He wanted to know more. So I sent him a long comment explaining our case against Canada, and I never got a response from him. And then the next day I sent him a comment saying, well, James, did you get it? Did you get the paragraph brief about our case? He said, no, I didn't. So then that means Canada censored it. He didn't get it. It was blocked from him receiving it, because the Canadian government is trying to stop our evidence from getting seen by anyone. That's what they're doing. Especially people on YouTube who could interview us on YouTube about everything that happened to us. The government is stopping that. Now, it's time for us to finally stop the government, I think. So that's what we're going to do. Anyway, I got to go. Shalom, God bless. I hope many of you have the chance to see my video. I'll know if they're still censoring it by the number of views I get. I will place it under the same title. I'll just call it Update Daniel Jennifer F. Nazi Case Against Canada Government Security Police. And I'll post it, and we'll see. If I get 10 views in the next 2 weeks, it's been censored by the Trudeau government illegally. Shalom, God bless.